Welcome back to Grade 8 History, Unit Number 2, Canada's Changing Society, 1890 to 1914. This is Lesson Number 13. How is industrialization changing daily life? Before we begin today's lesson, let's consider the following. Why do you think many people decided to move to cities in the late 1800s and early 1900s? How do you think this affected Canada's population? What I want you to do now is to put this video on pause so that you can reread the two questions I've just read, write down your responses to these two questions, and after you've done that, you may push play and we'll proceed. So put the video on pause now. All right, and let's get started. The period 1890 to 1905 was very important to the history of industrialization in Canada. Industrialization is the process by which technology and machinery replace most traditional manual labor tasks. During the industrialization period, new machines were being used in factories to produce more goods quickly and cheaply. Take a look at this picture on the left. This picture shows a boy using a water fountain on Spadina Avenue in 1899. Many homes did not yet have indoor plumbing. How would a public water fountain affect people living in these homes? Please put the video on pause so that you can write down your response to this question. Now let's continue. Before industrialization, farm life involved a lot of hard work with basic tools. New farm machines that were made in the late 1800s were too expensive for people living on small family-run farms. However, owners of large farms made enough money to invest in machines which allowed them to work more land. Unfortunately, the smaller farms could not compete and struggled financially. This caused many people living on small farms to move to the cities to find work in factories. Take a look at this illustration here. My question for you is, even with this new technology, what skills would these farmers still need to have in order to accomplish this task? Please put the video on pause now. All right, moving on. The movement of farmers to cities was not the only reason why the urban population increased so dramatically. Before the 1850s, most new immigrants started their lives as farmers. During the industrialization period, some immigrants still sought land to farm, particularly on the prairies. Many immigrants, however, moved straight to the cities in hopes of becoming financially successful or to make enough money to take back to their home countries. Life for the people who worked in factories, offices, and the homes of the factory owners was less than pleasant. Working class people very often did not make enough money needed to support their families. Hours were long, and there were no health benefits to help those who got sick or injured on the job. During this period, most immigrants to Canada came from the US, Britain, or Europe. Europe was overcrowded and there was not enough farmland or industrial jobs for everyone. Many European immigrants who came to the US during the late 1800s found that settlers had taken up most of the remaining farmland. Canada began advertising cheap farmland, and its industrialized cities offered good jobs. Canada's lumber and mining industries welcomed immigrant laborers. Industrialization greatly affected the economic status of different groups in society. Factories and machinery lowered the cost of manufacturing goods, so profits rose. However, building the factories and machines cost a lot of money, meaning that a person had to already be wealthy in order to become a factory owner. Wealthy factory owners kept the majority of the profits for themselves. They lived in large homes. Many had second residences so they could spend their holidays. Just to do a quick compare and contrast here between the two images that you see. My question is, how do the houses of the working class and the wealthy differ from each other? Put the video on pause so that you can take a closer look at these two images and write down what difference you see between working class houses and houses of the wealthy. Okay, let's move on. In factory areas, workers lived in crowded housing near the factory buildings. There was not enough housing close to factories for all of the workers, meaning that workers who lived farther away had to find a means of transportation. Gas-powered automobiles were a new invention, and a worker would have to save up 2 years' salary to afford one. Between 1890 and 1900, large cities in Canada adopted new forms of transportation. Horse-drawn streetcars were replaced by electric streetcars. Improved transportation systems meant that people could get around easier and travel farther distances. This caused the cities to spread out. Take a look at this image here. Take a look at all the streetcar track being laid down. What challenges do you think city residents may have faced during the construction of electric streetcar lines? Please put the video on pause now so that you can write down your response to this question. And moving forward. Bicycles were an important form of transportation in the 1890s, and they grew in popularity as bicycle technology improved. New bicycles were easier and safer to ride now that both wheels were the same size. There was a bicycle craze in Canada in the 1900s, especially among women. Bicycles offered women a chance to travel independently. It also meant that fashion changed as shorter skirts were produced that made it easier for women to ride their bicycles. Between 1890 and 1905, there were great differences between how various groups of children led their lives. These differences were due to economic status. Some children attended school, while others worked on the farm or in a factory. Children were considered young adults by age 13. However, in working class families, children as young as 10 were expected to support their families by leaving school and going to work. Some children worked in factories. Some worked as servants in wealthy homes. Others found work shining shoes, delivering newspapers, or running errands. Take a look at this image here. How do you think this child might have felt about having to work at this age? Please put the video on pause so you can take a look at this boy who is selling newspapers on the street and write down your response to the question in blue. And continuing. Problems associated with immigration, industrialization, and urbanization were becoming clearer. There was a growing belief that schools were needed to educate all children to meet the challenges of adult life in the city. The provincial governments controlled education, and by 1900, elementary school was mandatory for all provinces except Quebec. Despite the new laws, only wealthy children could attend school for long periods of time. Children in rural areas attended school seasonally outside of busy planting and harvest times. In school, class sizes were quite large compared to today. In Ontario, the average class had 70 students. Many Canadian cities had schools that were the same size as today's schools. This was because the cities had larger populations of children attending school. By contrast, rural schools were much smaller. Rural schools tended to have only one classroom with one teacher for all of the grades. Some rural schools were so small that only a few children were served. And take a look here at these two images, one of a rural school and one of an urban or city school. My question for you is, what similarities and differences can you see between these two schools? So please put the video on pause so that you can take a closer look at the images and write down your response to the question in blue. All right, and getting into the wrap up. Let's finish today's lesson by discussing the following, and we'll have our discussion next day. 1. How is transportation in Canadian cities today similar to what it was like in 1905? How is it different? And 2. What were some of the similarities and differences between the lives of wealthy people and working class people during the late 1800s and early 1900s? What I want you to do when I finish speaking is put the video on pause. If you don't feel ready to answer one or both of these questions you see in front of you, it means you need to go back and watch this video at least one more time. And then when you feel confident, please put the video on pause so that you can write down your answers to these two questions. And as always, I look forward to a lively discussion based around these questions as well as the questions which were given earlier in this recording. But until tomorrow's class, this concludes today's video.